In the summer of 1945, while the world was celebrating victory in Europe, something extraordinary was happening in the ruins of Berlin. Soviet soldiers were systematically dismantling one of the world's most important museums, piece by piece, creating up artifacts that had taken decades to collect and shipping them east on freight trains. This wasn't random looting. This was an organized military operation with detailed inventory lists, specialized equipment, and direct authorization from Joseph Stalin himself. Welcome back to our investigation into the secret war for European art. I'm Jeff Goldman, and if you missed part 1, I revealed how American monuments men were racing across Europe to save cultural treasures from Nazi destruction. But they weren't the only ones in this race. Today, I'm going to show you the other side of this story, Stalin's Trophy Brigades and the most systematic art acquisition program in human history. Let me start with a document that will blow your mind. In February 1945, 3 months before the war ended, Stalin issued a secret decree, not about troop movements or battle strategies, but about cultural acquisitions. The decree was simple and devastating. All art collections, libraries, and cultural objects in occupied German territories are to be considered war reparations and transported to the Soviet Union for permanent retention. Think about the timing here. The war wasn't even over, and Stalin was already planning the largest art heist in human history. While the monument's men were focused on preservation and restitution, Stalin was focused on acquisition and retention. Two completely different philosophies playing out simultaneously across the same battlefields. But here's what makes Stalin's operation so much more sophisticated than anything the Nazis ever attempted. The Trophy Brigades weren't random soldiers grabbing pretty things. They were specialized units led by art historians, museum directors, and cultural experts who had been planning this operation for years. The Soviet Union had been preparing detailed inventories of European collections since 1943, creating target lists that were more comprehensive than anything the Germans had compiled. The man who led this operation was named Igor Grabar, and his story reveals everything about Soviet intentions. Grabar wasn't a military officer. He was one of Russia's most distinguished art historians and the director of the Tretiakov Gallery. In 1944, Stalin personally appointed him to head something called the Committee for Cultural Acquisitions. Grabar's mission was simple: identify, locate, and acquire the greatest artworks in Europe for permanent display in Soviet museums. Grabar assembled teams of experts for each occupied territory. Not soldiers who happened to know about art, but genuine specialists, Byzantine scholars for religious artifacts, Renaissance experts for Italian works, Germanic specialists for Northern European collections. Each team had detailed maps, target lists, and transportation logistics planned in advance. Here's a classified Soviet document from March 1945 that survived in the archives. Priority targets include the complete collections of the Kaiser Friedrich Museum, the contents of private collections belonging to the Hohenzollern family, and all artifacts currently stored in protective facilities throughout the Reich. Secondary targets include university libraries, private manuscript collections, and archaeological materials from state museums. Notice the language: complete collections. The Trophy Brigades weren't interested in cherry-picking the most famous pieces. They wanted everything: entire museums, complete libraries, comprehensive cultural archives. This was cultural acquisition on a scale that made Nazi looting look like shoplifting. Let me tell you about their most spectacular success: the complete dismantling of Berlin's Pergamon Museum. The Pergamon contains some of the most important archaeological discoveries of the 19th and early 20th centuries. The Pergamon altar itself, a massive Hellenistic marble structure, was considered one of the wonders of the ancient world. The Ishtar Gate of Babylon, the Market Gate of Miletus, the Mshada facade, these weren't just artifacts, they were entire reconstructed buildings. When the war began, German curators had spent months carefully dismantling these massive structures for protection. It had taken 40 German specialists 4 weeks just to take apart the Pergamon altar. When Soviet Trophy Brigades arrived in Berlin, they found detailed documentation of exactly how everything had been disassembled and where each piece was stored. Captain Alexei Voronov, the Soviet officer who supervised the Pergamon operation, kept meticulous records. His shipping manifests, discovered in 1991, show that 43 railway cars were required to transport the contents of the Pergamon Museum to Moscow. 43 cars. That's not looting. That's industrial-scale cultural transfer. But here's what's really incredible about the Trophy Brigade operation. They didn't just take what they found. They actively searched for items that had been hidden by German curators. They interviewed captured German museum staff, examined pre-war catalog records, and systematically investigated every report of hidden cultural treasures. Dr. Natalia Sokolova, a Soviet art historian who worked with the Trophy Brigades, later wrote, "We understood that this was our only opportunity to acquire cultural treasures that had been accumulated over centuries by European aristocrats and institutions. The war had created a moment when everything was available, and we had to act decisively." The scale of their success was staggering. By the end of 1946, Trophy Brigades had shipped an estimated 2.5 million artworks to the Soviet Union. Not 2,500 or 25,000, 2.5 million individual pieces. Paintings, sculptures, manuscripts, archaeological artifacts, decorative arts, musical instruments, scientific specimens, and complete library collections. To put this in perspective, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, one of the world's largest museums, has about 1.5 million objects in its entire collection. Stalin's Trophy Brigades acquired more art in 3 years than the Met had collected in its entire history. Here's a shipping manifest from August 1945 that shows the systematic nature of these operations. Freight train number 447 departing Berlin for Moscow. Contents: 342 paintings from Kaiser Friedrich Museum, 156 sculptures from Prussian State Collection, 1,247 manuscripts from Berlin State Library, 89 medieval artifacts from Bode Museum, 67 Egyptian artifacts from Neues Museum. Total weight: 847 tons. Arrival estimated Moscow Central Depot, August 23rd. 847 tons of cultural artifacts on a single train. And this was just one shipment of hundreds that rolled east between 1945 and 1948. But the Trophy Brigades didn't limit themselves to state collections. They also systematically acquired private collections, often using information provided by German collaborators or extracted from captured German officials. Wealthy German families who had collected art for generations watched their entire heritage disappear onto Soviet freight trains. The von Panwitz collection, one of Germany's most important private libraries with over 60,000 rare books and manuscripts, was completely acquired by Trophy Brigades in 1946. The Guelph treasure, medieval religious artifacts that had been in the same German noble family for centuries, disappeared into Soviet transport containers. The private collection of the Hohenzollern family, including paintings, furniture, and decorative arts worth hundreds of millions in today's currency, was systematically created and shipped east. Here's what makes this story even more incredible. The Trophy Brigades continued operating long after the war ended. While the world thought the chaos of 1945 was over, these specialized Soviet units kept working. They operated through 1946, 1947, and into 1948, methodically stripping German cultural institutions of anything they had missed in the initial sweeps. A declassified CIA report from 1947 noted, Soviet cultural acquisition activities in the occupied zone appear to be intensifying rather than decreasing. Entire university libraries are being packed and shipped eastward. German museum officials report systematic removal of collections that had previously been overlooked. The Americans were beginning to realize they had been outplayed. While the monument's men had been focused on dramatic rescues and individual discoveries, the Trophy Brigades had been conducting a comprehensive cultural acquisition program that transferred the artistic heritage of an entire nation. General Lucius Clay, the American military governor of occupied Germany, wrote in a classified memo, "We are losing the cultural lore. Soviet operations are more systematic, more comprehensive, and more successful than our preservation efforts. If this continues, the cultural balance of Europe will be permanently shifted eastward." But here's the most shocking part. Stalin wasn't just collecting these treasures randomly. He had a specific vision for how they would be used. Secret Soviet documents reveal plans for a massive new Museum of World Culture in Moscow that would display the greatest artworks from across Europe, not as stolen goods, but as legitimate war reparations that demonstrated Soviet victory over fascism. The planned museum would have been unlike anything the world had ever seen. 27 halls displaying Greek and Roman antiquities, Renaissance paintings, medieval manuscripts, and archaeological treasures from across Europe, all presented as evidence of Soviet cultural superiority and the failure of Western capitalism to protect cultural heritage. This museum was never built, but the acquisitions continued. By 1948, when Trophy Brigade operations finally ended, Stalin had accumulated the largest collection of European art outside of Europe itself. More importantly, he had created a bargaining chip that would influence international diplomacy for the next 70 years. Because here's what the Trophy Brigades understood that the monuments men didn't. Cultural artifacts aren't just pretty objects. They're instruments of soft power, diplomatic leverage, and national identity. Control the art, and you control the narrative of civilization itself. In our next episode, I'm going to reveal the most dramatic part of this story, the direct confrontations between monuments men and Trophy Brigades. We'll see how both sides raced to reach the same hidden caches, the diplomatic incidents that almost caused international crises, and the incredible discoveries that neither side expected to find. Because while the Trophy Brigades were systematically stripping German collections, the monuments men were making discoveries that would challenge everything both sides thought they knew about Nazi art looting. Discoveries that revealed not just what had been stolen, but where it was hidden and how to get it back. The secret war for European art was about to become a very public diplomatic crisis that continues to this day.